He moonwalked across stages, shattered records, moved billions with his music. But behind the glove, behind the spotlight, behind the curtain was a man drowning in debt. No one saw it coming. Because Michael Jackson wasn't broke. He was asset-rich. But he was cash-poor. And in the end, that paradox cost him everything. Michael Jackson earned over $1 billion during his lifetime. One of the best-selling artists in history. Every tour was a global spectacle. Every album release an international event. But none of it saved him. By the time he died in 2009, his empire was crumbling under a staggering $500 million in debt. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow, unrelenting bleed. It began with Neverland, a 2,700-acre fantasy land in California, complete with a zoo, a train, a theme park. He didn't just buy a home, he bought a kingdom. But kingdoms need to be maintained. Neverland reportedly cost $10 million a year to operate. That's $27,000 every single day, just to keep the dream alive. Then came the lawsuits. Dozens. Some justified, many not. Settlements. Legal fees. Damage control. Michael didn't just fight in court. He fought in silence, paying millions to keep things buried. The costs added up quietly, invisibly. But the real story lies in how he tried to hold it all together. Michael wasn't foolish. He was brilliant in ways most couldn't see. In the mid-'80s, he made a move so bold, it shocked the industry. He bought the publishing rights to over 250 Beatles songs for $47.5 million. People thought he was crazy. But that catalog became a cash cow, generating tens of millions annually. Later, he merged it with Sony's publishing arm, creating a 50-50 joint venture, Sony/ATV. Eventually, that stake alone was worth over $1 billion. So how did someone who owned that kind of asset run out of money? Because those assets weren't liquid. They couldn't be spent, couldn't pay the bills. To access cash, he had to borrow again and again, using the assets as collateral. Loans piled on top of loans. Soon, even interest payments became unbearable. This is the paradox. You can own an empire and still not have enough to buy dinner. Because net worth is not the same as cash flow. Michael lived in a financial illusion. His wealth was vast, but untouchable. On paper, he was a billionaire. In reality, he struggled to make payroll. It's a lesson hidden behind velvet curtains and golden gates. If your wealth isn't accessible, it isn't wealth. You need liquidity, cash that moves when you do. Because in a crisis, art collections and real estate portfolios can't save you. Only cash can. Michael Jackson built a legacy that transcended music. But his financial story is a haunting reminder that success without structure and riches, without liquidity, can collapse under their own weight. There was Michael Jackson the artist. And then, there was Michael Jackson the product. One crafted melodies. The other sold illusions. And it was the illusion that demanded everything. Every hat. Every diamond-studded glove. Every detail of his public image engineered. Rehearsed, paid for. Nothing about being the king of pop came cheap. His life became a production. And productions burn cash like fire eats paper. But it wasn't just about vanity. Michael wasn't chasing opulence for the sake of it. He was trying to control the narrative. To protect the fragile boy beneath the crown. He grew up poor in Gary, Indiana. One of 9 children. A father who pushed him. A childhood lost to rehearsals and studio lights. Michael wasn't just escaping poverty, he was fleeing trauma. And he built walls of wealth to keep the past out. But those walls needed constant reinforcement. At one point, his monthly spending reached over $30 million. Art auctions. Luxury hotels. Security teams. A reported $1 million per year on personal staff alone. Not to mention payments on over a dozen mortgages. And here's the twist. Michael didn't actually see the money the way most do. He thought in terms of performance. Art. Emotion. He believed if he gave the world magic, the money would always follow. For a time, it did. In 1993, the Dangerous World Tour grossed over $100 million. He gave much of it away to charity. His generosity was real. But it was also unsustainable. He gave like a man who didn't believe he could run out. But every dollar earned carried a heavier price. Because with more fame came more risk. More lawsuits. More security. More anxiety. Michael had built not just a brand, but a myth. And the myth required maintenance. The real tragedy? There were people around him who knew the numbers. Accountants. Advisors. Some tried to sound the alarm. But Michael didn't want constraints. He wanted freedom. And when your income is irregular, Millions one year, nothing the next. Freedom becomes dangerous. There's a lesson here. It's not what you earn. It's what you keep. More importantly, it's how you manage the down years that determines whether you survive. Michael never adjusted for the down years. He kept spinning like the peaks would never end. But peaks always end. And when they did, he was exposed. His wealth was a mirage, always impressive from a distance. But up close, it was brittle, held together by loans, leverage deals, and hope. He wasn't reckless. He was vulnerable. And vulnerability, when mixed with access to massive credit, can be fatal. He wasn't just living like a star. He was trying to heal like one, using money to fill something deeper, something cash could never touch. In the end, the persona consumed the person, and the financial weight of maintaining it brought everything crashing down. He wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol, a spectacle, a global fantasy. Michael Jackson didn't live in the real world. He was the world's dream. But dreams are expensive, and illusions cost more than reality ever will. To the public, he was untouchable. But behind the scenes, he was suffocating, drowning in an identity that demanded constant performance. He couldn't just be Michael. He had to become Michael Jackson, every day, every minute, every breath. The pressure wasn't just emotional. It was financial. Image is currency in entertainment, and his image had to be perfect. The clothing, the entourage, the gated estates, every element carefully orchestrated, meticulously styled, and ruthlessly expensive. He didn't just buy a house. He built Neverland, a 2,700-acre sanctuary complete with a zoo, a personal amusement park, a train station, and artificial lakes. A place where time stood still, where the wounds of childhood could hide. But it wasn't just a home. It was a theater, a living movie set. And like any movie, it needed a budget. Estimates say it cost Michael over $10 million a year just to keep Neverland running. That's $833,000 a month. $27,000 every day, just to keep the fantasy from falling apart. But it didn't stop there. Michael's spending extended far beyond Neverland's gates. He reportedly spent hundreds of thousands on antiques and collectibles and single shopping trips. On one infamous spree, he dropped $6 million in a few hours on sculptures and furniture. He bought Rolls Royces he rarely drove, artwork he never hung, not out of greed, but out of impulse, out of emotion. This wasn't wild extravagance for the sake of flexing. This was a man filling silence with things. He didn't see dollars, he saw comfort. He wasn't wasting money. He was trying to heal with it. You see, Michael never had a childhood. He was on stage at 5, recording hits by 8, world famous by 10. By 13, he'd outgrown his youth. And the man who emerged was haunted by a boy who never got to exist. Neverland wasn't a display of wealth. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim innocence. But emotional wounds and financial strategy rarely go hand in hand. Michael didn't budget, he trusted. He handed control of his finances to business managers, lawyers, and advisors. Many well-meaning, some not. He was generous to a fault, giving money to family, friends, strangers. He believed he'd never run out. And for a while, that belief was true. In the 80s and 90s, his tours grossed hundreds of millions. His album sales were astronomical. And then there was the Beatles catalog. In 1985, he shocked the industry by purchasing ATV Music, which included the Beatles, publishing rights for $47.5 million. It was a genius move. The catalog generated steady, substantial revenue for years. But here's the catch. It wasn't liquid. That asset might have been worth hundreds of millions. But it couldn't buy groceries. So he did what many high-net-worth individuals do. He borrowed against it. One loan, then another, secured by assets he couldn't sell. He was wealthy on paper, but paper can't pay bills. By the 2000s, he was refinancing constantly, taking loans to pay off other loans, bleeding equity to maintain lifestyle, all while revenue declined and lawsuits multiplied. And the thing about illusions is, they don't die quickly. They fade. Slowly. Tragically. Fans still screamed. Cameras still flashed. But inside, Michael was cornered, chained to an empire that no longer served him. This is the hidden cost of image. When your brand is your identity, and your identity is a business, every choice becomes financial. Every smile, every performance, every purchase, it all feeds the machine. And when the machine breaks, you do too. There's a financial principle buried in this heartbreak. Don't confuse visibility with viability. Just because you're seen doesn't mean you're secure. Just because you earn doesn't mean you're safe. The strongest brands can still collapse under debt if their foundations aren't liquid. Michael Jackson lived in a palace of mirrors. Brilliant, blinding, beautiful. But behind every reflection was a man, isolated, exhausted, and slowly running out of time. It was the kind of deal that shifts history. The kind of play that doesn't just make headlines, it changes the entire board. In 1985, Michael Jackson made one of the boldest financial moves in the history of the music industry, and no one saw it coming. He was just 27, already a global icon, already drowning in fame. But behind the moonwalk and the glittering glove was a strategist, quiet, calculating, fearless. When the publishing rights to 8TV Music went up for sale, Michael didn't hesitate. That catalog included over 4,000 songs. Among them, the Beatles, John Lennon and Paul McCartney's legacy, the most coveted copyrights in the business. Everyone expected a bidding war between record labels, veteran moguls, even McCartney himself. But Michael outmaneuvered them all. He paid $47.5 million and walked away owning the Beatles. People laughed at him. Critics said it was ridiculous. Too much for just songs. But Michael knew what they didn't. Publishing is power. Every time a song plays on radio, in a movie, on TV, someone gets paid. And now, that someone was him. It was a masterstroke. The purchase turned into a goldmine, generating tens of millions annually. By the late 90s, he merged 8TV with Sony's publishing division to form Sony/8TV, retaining a 50% stake. That single deal would later be valued at over $1 billion. It was his greatest asset and his greatest trap. Because as powerful as that catalog was, it wasn't liquid. It couldn't be spent. It could only be borrowed against. And borrow he did. The catalog became collateral over and over. For loans. For real estate. For lawsuits. For life. It kept him afloat, even as his finances spiraled. But that dependence came at a cost. He no longer controlled his destiny. Every refinancing gave away a little more leverage. A little more freedom. Soon, he wasn't just protecting the catalog, he was defending it. And when his income slowed, the pressure became unbearable. Here's where the paradox deepens. Michael Jackson had the instincts of a mogul. He saw value where others didn't. But he didn't build the infrastructure around that genius. No CFO. No fortress of advisors. Just managers. Friends. Opportunists. Many of them enabling. Few of them honest. So while the catalog grew in value, his expenses grew faster. And the walls began to shake. He was still Michael Jackson. But behind the scenes, he was fighting to keep the lights on. In 2001, just before releasing Invincible, he borrowed $200 million against the catalog. By 2005, another $270 million. Each time, deeper in debt. Each time, more desperate to protect what he built. Eventually, the catalog was no longer just an asset. It was a life raft. And here's the irony. The very thing that proved his brilliance became the noose that tied him to debt. There's a lesson hiding in this billion-dollar bet. An appreciating asset can still bankrupt you if it doesn't generate cash. Michael owned a crown jewel, but he couldn't spend it. And so he leveraged it until he had almost nothing left. At the time of his death, he still held 50% of Sony/8TV. That piece alone was worth hundreds of millions. But his debts had ballooned beyond $500 million. He had the gold, but no oxygen. This is the heartbreak of financial imbalance. When value is trapped in vaults. When wealth is measured in headlines, not in cash flow. Michael Jackson outsmarted the music industry. But he couldn't outspend the consequences. And the bet that should have made him untouchable ultimately chained him to the very system he tried to escape. The cameras flashed. The crowd screamed. The world watched. But Michael Jackson was no longer performing. He was defending his life. It was 2005. A courtroom in Santa Maria, California. 12 counts. A global spectacle. The king of pop, on trial for child molestation. The most famous man in the world, fighting for more than just his freedom. He was fighting for survival. What most people didn't see was the financial earthquake beneath the headlines. The trial didn't just threaten his legacy, it detonated his bank account. Legal fees skyrocketed. His income collapsed. Endorsements vanished. Residuals dipped. No label wanted to release his music. No sponsor wanted their name beside his. He was radioactive. The expenses from the trial alone are believed to have cost him over $20 million. But that was just the beginning. To cover it, he borrowed. Again. He leveraged more of his Beatles catalog. He signed over future revenue just to pay present bills. He was mortgaging tomorrow because today was burning. But here's the truth. Michael had been paying for silence long before he stepped into that courtroom. In 1993, he quietly settled a previous civil case for $23 million. No admission of guilt, no trial, just a check, an effort to make it all disappear. But silence has a cost, and it never buys peace. Because each payout was followed by whispers, each lawsuit by more suspicion, each dollar spent trying to protect his image only added weight to the fall. The press painted him as a recluse, a fallen star. But he wasn't hiding from fame, he was hiding from collapse. And Neverland, once a place of joy, turned cold. Abandoned, deserted, haunted. In 2006, the property was shut down. Staff laid off. Animals removed. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a symbol of what was lost, of what had decayed. Behind closed doors, Michael was spiraling. His credit dried up. His debt climbed to over $350 million. Banks stopped returning calls. Advisors scrambled for solutions, none came. But here's the twist. He was still earning. His catalog was still generating millions a year. His brand still sold merchandise, even in exile. His fan base, though quieter, never truly left. But it wasn't enough. Because debt multiplies when ignored. And for every dollar that came in, 5 more were owed. This is where the financial lesson turns brutal. Reputation is a balance sheet. When you lose public trust, you lose leverage. And when you lose leverage, even your best assets become invisible. Michael owned the crown jewels of pop music. But nobody wanted to be seen doing business with him. So those jewels just sat there untouched. Like gold locked in a vault, gathering dust. He tried to fight back. A few appearances. A few statements. But the world had moved on. And Michael wasn't just broke. He was emotionally bankrupt. He wasn't living anymore. He was floating. From hotel to hotel. Country to country. Dubai. Bahrain. Ireland. No plan. No home. Just exile. This is what a slow-motion collapse looks like. Not a single crash, but 1,000 cracks. Spreading quietly. Until the entire structure caves in. Michael Jackson didn't lose everything overnight. He lost it inch by inch. Payment by payment. Loan by loan. Silence by silence. And by the time he looked up, there was no one left to trust. No one left to fix it. He didn't want to do it. Not really. He was tired. Fragile. Worn thin from years of lawsuits, media storms, and mounting debt. But Michael Jackson had no choice. This is it. The name of the tour. But also a quiet confession. This was the last card he had left to play. In 2009, Jackson announced his return to the stage. 50 shows at London's O2 Arena. He hadn't toured in over a decade. And yet, tickets sold out in hours. Over 1 million in total. The world still loved him. They always had. But this wasn't a comeback fueled by passion. It was powered by pressure. A desperate bid to fix what had fallen apart. Michael was in debt, deeply. Estimates put the number at over $500 million. He was still the partial owner of the Sony/ATV catalog. Still had merchandise revenue. Still had fans in every corner of the planet. But none of that mattered now. Because creditors wanted cash. And This Is It was supposed to deliver it. The deal was simple. The tour could generate over $100 million in net income. A successful run might even reignite new licensing deals, new albums, endorsements, TV rights. A whole empire, reborn. But the problem wasn't the deal. It was the man. Michael's body was no longer keeping up with the myth. Decades of relentless performing had taken their toll. He was struggling to rehearse. Struggling to sleep. Struggling to stand for more than a few hours at a time. In the rehearsals, he was trying, really trying. Still dancing. Still singing. Still pushing. But behind the movements, there was a shadow of urgency. Because this wasn't just about art anymore. It was about survival. His team, managers, producers, promoters, they all had a stake. And everyone needed it to happen. So the pressure grew. And so did the medications. Michael, already battling insomnia and anxiety, began relying on stronger substances to get through the nights. Not to feel high, but just to rest, to recharge, to make it to the next rehearsal, to stay upright long enough to save his legacy. What no one knew, not the fans, not even some of his closest confidants, was just how fragile he had become. He was rehearsing for a resurrection, but inside, he was fading. This Is It wasn't just a show. It was a financial strategy. A $100 million swing to erase a $500 million hole. He was ready to give it everything, but he was running out of everything to give. There's a brutal irony here. The man who revolutionized the business of music, the man who taught artists they could own their masters, their image, their voice, was now rehearsing not for legacy, but for liquidity. Because when your wealth is tied to assets you can't touch and loans you can't repay, you're not rich. You're stuck. And Michael Jackson was stuck in a body that wouldn't cooperate, in a system that no longer protected him, in a comeback designed more to pay bills than inspire audiences. In just weeks before opening night, he was gone. The news stunned the world. June 25, 2009. Michael Jackson, dead at 50. The comeback never came. And the debt? It didn't disappear. It became someone else's problem. But the final curtain hadn't fallen just yet, because what happened after his death would turn everything upside down. It didn't take long. Hours after the world learned Michael Jackson was gone, the numbers started climbing. Radio stations played him on loop. News channels ran wall-to-wall retrospectives. Spotify crashed. iTunes charted nothing but him. Suddenly, the world remembered. The music, the legacy, the magic. And just like that, he became more valuable in death than he had been in life. The albums flew off shelves. Merchandise exploded. A flood of licensing deals appeared overnight. His estate, once buried under hundreds of millions in debt, was now flooded with cash. In the year following his death, Michael Jackson earned over $275 million, more than any living artist. And the paradox hit like lightning. The man who died in debt was now the richest dead man alive. It was surreal. The This Is It concert never happened. But the documentary, stitched together from rehearsal footage, did. And it became a box office smash, grossing over $260 million worldwide. It was intended as behind-the-scenes content. It became his final performance. Posthumous albums were released. New merchandise lines launched. Cirque du Soleil created 2 Michael Jackson shows. Each one packed stadiums. Each one poured millions into the estate. And all of it, now, was managed differently. The chaos of his final years was replaced with professional control. His estate, led by executors and legal strategists, began untangling the wreckage, negotiating debts, restructuring loans, selling off unneeded assets, and protecting the crown jewel, the Sony/ATV catalog. Over the next decade, the numbers were staggering. His estate generated over $2 billion in revenue and paid down the mountain of debt he died under. The same music industry that had once turned its back on him was now milking his legacy for profit, and the world was happy to buy. It's the darkest twist of the story. Michael Jackson became too valuable to fail only after he was gone. And that raises a haunting truth. In fame, death is not the end. It's the rebirth of the brand. Because in death, he stopped spending, stopped borrowing, stopped making headlines. And for the first time in decades, his value could finally be managed. He no longer needed security. No more lawsuits. No more settlements. No more damage control. Just assets. And endless demand. That's the secret no one tells you about celebrity wealth. It's not about the person. It's about the rights, the likeness, the intellectual property. And Michael Jackson owned more of that than almost anyone in history. But here's the question. Why couldn't it happen while he was alive? Why couldn't the estate that now operates with such efficiency have existed when he needed it most? The answer is brutal. Because Michael Jackson wasn't a business. He was a person. Flawed. Emotional. Impulsive. Generous. And people don't always make the best CEOs of their own empires. He was too trusting. Too isolated. Too focused on creating, never managing. And when he was finally free of those responsibilities, when the man was gone, the machine kicked in. There's a harsh financial truth in all of this. Systems matter more than symbols. You can be iconic. You can be a genius. But if your business isn't structured, your wealth can still vanish. Michael Jackson didn't need more talent. He needed more infrastructure. And in the end, the empire he built by hand was only rescued by those who came in after the music stopped. He sold over 400 million records, reinvented music videos, changed pop forever. And yet, in the end, Michael Jackson died in a rented mansion. No kingdom, no Neverland, no throne, just debts, pills, and a dream that had run out of air. How does that happen? How does someone so gifted, so celebrated, so endlessly lucrative. End up broke? Not in spirit, not in talent, but in the very currency he seemed to possess in endless supply. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Wealth is not about what you own. It's about what you can access and what you can sustain. Michael had assets that rivaled corporate empires, but he lacked control, lacked cash flow, lacked liquidity. He owned a billion-dollar catalog, but couldn't pay his monthly bills. He lived in a palace, but had no real home. He was surrounded by people, but completely alone. He wasn't greedy. He wasn't reckless. He was vulnerable, wounded, carrying the weight of a world he never asked to rule. He wanted to create, not calculate. He wanted to give, not audit. But the system he was trapped in rewarded the opposite. It rewarded those who could exploit him, those who could make money from the myth, while the man quietly disappeared. And when he died, they came running. To manage, to package, to rebuild the fortune he never got to enjoy. It worked. The debt was cleared. The empire was reborn. The world remembered him not for the lawsuits or the loneliness, but for the music. The irony? The man who taught artists to own their voice never truly owned his peace. So what do we take from all this? What's the lesson buried inside the spectacle? It's this. Your financial health isn't about how famous you are or how much you earn. It's about what you keep and how you protect it. Owning valuable things doesn't mean you're secure, because assets can rise in value, but collapse under pressure. You need systems. You need liquidity. You need the right people before the wrong ones take everything. Michael Jackson's story is not just a tragedy. It's a mirror. For anyone chasing status without structure. For anyone believing that numbers on a screen mean peace of mind. They don't. Wealth without access is weight. Fame without boundaries is a cage. And genius without support is a tragedy waiting to happen. He gave us everything, and he left with almost nothing. But maybe, if we pay attention, we won't make the same mistake. Subscribe to Money and Fame. Which celebrity's financial story should we tell next? Write it in the comments. Thank you, and see you.